Did somebody ask for a true champion of high-speed rail? Did someone ask for one of the most effective legislators in Congress today? Did someone ask for a visionary in transportation and a true warrior as it relates to bringing high-speed rail to America? Well, if you've asked for it, we have delivered it. We are delighted to have Congresswoman Louise Slaughter share a few remarks, and actually has agreed to take some questions and answers with us. If you don't know Louise Slaughter, you haven't been around Washington very long, and you haven't seen the workings of Congress and how they actually make it happen. She's one of those congresswomen that is in leadership. She is now currently ranking member of the Rules Committee, which is a very powerful committee on the Hill. It becomes more powerful as issues become more clear. And we've got some issues today that were announced by the administration, and the lines of demarcation are becoming more and more clear. We'll hear from Chairman John Mica tomorrow and his perspective on the announcement today, and his position on high-speed rail is also becoming more and more clear. But Louise Slaughter has been a long-term champion for high-speed rail. She is interested in a national plan, but focusing primarily in the state of New York, where she resides. Her mission is to connect Albany and Buffalo in the Empire Corridor, but also carry it up to Canada. As you heard from John Paracella today, the Canadian government is very supportive of transborder high-speed rail, and that is part of the vision that Louise Slaughter shares. So without further ado, her full bio, and just a summary of her long list of accomplishments is in the program. But let's hear from the distinguished Congresswoman from New York, Congresswoman Louise Slaughter. Thank you very much.
Thank you all. That was such a lovely introduction. I really appreciated hearing it, especially since I had to fly in again today on US Air. I don't know if any of the rest of you all have this great experience, but that's about the only way I can get to Washington from Rochester. And we used to have a saying back when I was in the New York State Legislature, time to spare, take US Air. They always apologize very nicely, never giving us the foggiest idea of why we've had to wait there for an hour and a half. But nonetheless, that's one of the reasons that I do love high-speed rail. And I think the fact that in upstate New York, the second, third, and largest cities in that magnificent state have no way to fly to the state capital in Albany. So you can see we are badly in need of this kind of help. And let me assure you that every group that comes to Washington is not greeted with the news of $53 billion appropriation and what it is we're trying to build here. That's some of the best news for me. I've talked a lot about the fact that the United States doesn't seem to think big anymore. The only airport we've actually built since the 1970s was the Stapleton in Denver. We have not done much at all for ourselves, but we do spend $8 billion a month that we borrow on a war. And we would be very wise to cut that out as soon as we can with our crumbling infrastructure, with our economy in the trouble. Thank you. Appreciate that. At least two of us don't like it. But $2 billion a month, a week, $8 billion a month is beyond the pale to me. In a country where our finances are shaky and where our infrastructure is shakier, we need to be doing better for home, spend a little money here. So let's talk about President Obama this morning. That is really wonderful. He mentioned it, at the State of the Union, said it would be 25 years. They have reduced that to 6. And I'm so glad for that as well, because it takes far too long now to build something in America. One of the things that we need to do in Rochester is we have a 1947 railroad station that was built temporarily. It's not ADA compliant. It is pretty awful. And although that road there, that area there, has been railroad since the late 1800s, the environmental impact statement on replacing that with another railroad station will take about 2 years. We're struggling as hard as we can to try to get that changed because I think that's absolutely pointless, and we really need to be up and doing here and more than just paperwork. But anyway, I share that goal, believe me, of giving 80% of Americans access to high-speed rail. I just met one of my fellow Kentuckians, and I can remember always that the L&N Railroad, Louisville, Nashville, was one that I grew up watching Southern Railroad. Covers Dixie like the dew. I always loved them. All my life I have loved the railroads. But it's much more to me than just a piece of folklore and how a person may feel about it. But we're going to work very hard to make sure that this $53 billion is included in the final budget, all of it. Now, some of them, their members are going to be resistant. Some of them do not care about spending anything in our current environment. But the truth is that only bold investments in the nation's infrastructure will allow us to build a foundation for a stronger future and be able to compete in the global economy. I think a high-speed rail network is also a matter of national security. After 9/11, when all airports were closed, there was no way for most of us to move anywhere except by automobile. But the ability to ensure the safety of our citizens is tied directly to our ability to rebuild and retool our transportation networks and our economy that relies on these networks for success. A national high-speed rail system would provide a national security defense at home, serving as a modern network to move both civilian and military personnel at a moment's notice, while freeing the freight lines to move goods and supplies. In addition, the recent events in the Middle East have again reminded us of how closely we are tied to the oil-rich Middle East to meet our energy needs. This dependency is bad for America's national security interest and will only get worse as the world's oil supply reaches its peak, and it has, I believe, and it's beginning to decline. A national high-speed rail system will end our oil dependency quickly and permanently, prevents us from being dragged into future struggles to secure oil to meet our energy needs. And that's what we've done. Certainly you could even tie the thirst for oil to Vietnam. In addition to our dependence on foreign oil, we face an increasingly urgent climate crisis, with more severe and dangerous storms grinding commerce to a halt, stranding millions and threatening human life. These storms are just the latest reminder that the benefits of a greener rail system can no longer wait. If we are to realize the economic, environmental, and security benefits of high-speed rail, we must think big. Anything other than a national high-speed rail network just won't do. We have a chance to design nothing less than the transportation and economic foundation of the next 50 years. But if we instead choose for limited or targeted investments in high-speed rail, we'll be left with nothing but novelty projects and only limited and targeted benefits for our country. Quite simply, a high-speed train in Florida and a high-speed train on the Northeast Seaboard does not make a foundation for 50 years. These investments in high-speed rail will more than pay for itself with the jobs created for Americans who are in need of work and the opportunities that it creates for future growth. According to the United States Conference of Mayors, cities and regions around the country will see job growth from the realization of high-speed rail network, including at least 21,000 estimated new jobs and $1.1 billion in new wages in my home state of New York. As rail lines open, communities are brought closer together, the potential long-term impact will only grow. When our nation's interstate highway system was built, we invested in a transportation network that passed through every state in the Union, benefiting commerce and private citizens alike. Like the Interstate Highway System project was neither targeted nor limited. It was a bold step toward an American future, and the investment paid off. The Interstate Highway System helped to secure America's position as the dominant economic world power throughout the remainder of the 20th century. 65 years after the passage of legislation to build our interstate highway system, we face another opportunity to boldly win the future, and we must not fail. A national high-speed rail network is vital, as we pointed out, for our economy and for the years to come. So I will urge my colleagues in Congress and the audience here today and Americans across the country to support the President's $53 billion investment and realize a national high-speed rail network in the United States. Thank you very much. And I can take a couple questions if got to get back up to rules. Thank you. Thank you. Appreciate it.
If I might,
certainly,
Congresswoman, recognize your excellent staff.
Oh, I wish you would. I should have.
John,
you'd be mad as all get out.
John is a very effective staffer on the Hill and is
where is he?
Right here.
Oh, okay. John Monsef.
John Monsef.
From Egypt. So he's been very interested, obviously, in what's going on in the Middle East because he has family there.
And he's very committed to the high-speed rail initiatives throughout the country, but particularly in the Empire State. He has Ray LaHood and Karen Ray's phone numbers on speed dial. He calls them into the office at least once a month to get an update. So that's
once a week, I think.
Once a week, yeah.
Every Monday. Yeah.
Yep, they have a standard conference call. That's what good staffing is all about. And appreciate your support, John, and leadership in this area. Is Petra here? Yes, Petra.
Hi, Petra.
Yes, another a big supporter of high-speed rail in the Northeast Corridor and a supporter of the Empire Corridor that you've advanced for many years. Petra will be speaking to us later today, and we look forward to her report from America 2050. And Malcolm Smith was here earlier, and others from the New York area. Carol and Dwayne are here as well from Louis Berger and the new Diversity Alliance group that's been formed to help promote small business and diversity in this corridor. So let's put some good, hard questions to the Congresswoman. Yes, sir. Please stand up and your name, please.
Richard Arena.
Oh, yes.
Right. Richard, it's always a pleasure.
You mentioned the issue with environmental impact statements.
Yes.
Congressman Micah mentioned the same thing in his meeting in New York City last week. The question I have is, what can we do and what can Congress do to shorten environmental impact statements, to stop all of the excessive mitigation requirements and the lawsuits, so we can stop building things again in this country?
Well, I think this is the perfect time because, as you know, the President has asked for all suggestions he can for regulations that are outdated. I believe in regulation. Let me be honest about that. I don't know. I think if we'd had better regulations on the financial system, we would not have been where we are today. But so I'm not anti-regulation, but I will tell you that the environmental impact statement taking 3 years for a small railroad station makes no sense. Makes no economic sense, and unless people who are doing all that study are getting paid and that's the economic benefit, I don't know what comes from that. And we will be working hard to change a lot of that, but I think we've got a lot of company on it right now. With that in question, Mike, a lot of people up there are trying to change that regulation, but we can't really do with a hodgepodge here. I mean, we've really got a country to rebuild. We've got a country to save. I'm appalled by the statistics that we are 14th in the world in college graduates, that we are 35th in the world in math. What happened to us? We used to be #1 out there doing all this, but we just have literally fallen behind. And I know this is budget time, and it's pretty serious business. And we had a lot of school board people in this morning. But New York, in my city, for example, they're paying over $17,000 per pupil for education. That's got to be really dealt with when only 40% of them graduate. So there's a lot that we can do, and I think this is the time. But if we're going to build, and we're going to really redo this infrastructure, we had better be paying attention to how we're getting it done. And when I was appalled by the fact that, I think John told me they're going to cut it down to about 2 years?
Under a year now.
Under a year. So we got somewhere with that one, and that's good because we would cut that in half. And I'll tell you, it was appalling to all of us. It could take that long.
Next question. Yes, sir.
Ray Taylor, and I'm from Hampton Roads.
All right.
And a couple of people have mentioned here today that when you look down the future, one of the ideal end games is to have publicly owned, privately operated. That kind of end game infrastructure. if I'm not mistaken, some states cannot own, some can own, and so there seems to be a difficulty here on this issue. Maybe it's a Rules Committee topic.
Actually, I don't think it's a federal issue if the states make their own rules.
But if we want a federal network, then maybe...
I want a federal network, and I think it should supersede, and I think we should start next week.
So I want to put it on the table because it's
an
unraveled. It's a question that needs to be unraveled.
Yes. Well, that's what we do like to do best.
Petra.
Good afternoon, Congresswoman. I had the opportunity to attend Vice President Biden's announcement.
Oh, good.
And was so pleased to hear about the administration's commitment or proposal for $53 billion over 6 years. I think the next question that many of us advocates will get in support of this proposal is how are we going to pay for it? And with the House Subcommittee on Transportation and Infrastructure chairman proposing something on the order of a $250 billion transportation bill, I was just curious, where do you see that funding coming from? Do you see it as a general fund commitment or a new dedicated transportation funding revenue source?
So, Petra, that hasn't yet been decided. But we will, obviously, the budget's coming up this month, and we will be getting about doing that. But transportation and rail has such a lot of support in the Congress on both sides of the aisle that I think if we can get past the sticker shock for a lot of people that we actually want to spend something on ourselves, that we should be able to get that done. Right at this moment, I don't know whether they expect to do a bond issue, whether it's going to be a dedicated fund. We really don't know. Those specifics were not spelled out to us. But we can try to find out this afternoon.
Thank you.
We'll know pretty soon, but it will be a Rules Committee issue, as somebody pointed out a while ago. All the bills that go to the floor except suspensions come by the Rules Committee.
Time for one or two more questions. Yes, sir.
It's not working, I think.
Thank
That's
you for
good.
coming by. As someone who lives in the Buffalo, New York area and counts you as my congressional representative, thank you for taking a leadership role on this issue.
Happy to do it.
I'm also work for a company that prepares the environmental impact statements, and I'll tell you, it's not necessarily the regulations that are outdated, but what I see constantly is that the agencies involved and the lead agencies, they get to a point where there's paralysis. They don't want to make a decision. They want more studies. Legal counsel wants everything dotted and crossed without just committing to a decision.
Could you come talk to us about that?
I'd be happy to.
All right. I really would like to understand what kind of psychology it is that, as you point out, the inability to make a decision.
That's part of it.
Calling you for yet one more study.
It's the East Bridge factor, as you're well aware of.
Well, they've been trying to build a bridge in Buffalo for 40 years. I can remember 20 years ago they had bumper stickers saying, "Build it already." And we still haven't built it already.
No.
But I don't know whether that's government dragging their feet or other things, but I'd really like to understand how this environmental impact study, how that gets done and why it takes so long.
Okay, I'd be happy to.
If you do that, I'd be ever great. I'll take you to lunch.
Okay.
Okay, done.
But my real question is, what do you think the change in administration in New York State, will that have any effect on extending high-speed rail to?
I think so. I talked to Andrew Cuomo before he was elected. And expressed that he was very good. As you know, when Wisconsin gave up their money, New York went after it like we were all over it like a fuzz on a blanket. And we were able to get some of it. But Cuomo said at that point he's very keen on having it. What we want to do is not just move people from Buffalo to Albany, because that may not sound like the most exciting thing in the world for you to do. But it's pretty nice if you can't get to Albany. But we want to go north from Albany to Montreal, west to Toronto, back south down into the Buffalo area. It would give us one of the largest economic development areas in the Western Hemisphere. And we need it. We've suffered mightily up in our part, although we have the high-skilled workers, I think, in America. NAFTA ruined our jobs. Kodak, when I first came down here, had over 60,000 workers. They now today have fewer than 6,000. So that will give you some idea of the devastation that can happen to a community. All right.
One more question.
One more?
On this side.
Oh.
Anybody? Come on now. Don't be shy.
Oh, that's all right. They need to hear the next speaker. Thank you all. Appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
It's a pleasure.